Good evening. On behalf of NYSAFLT's Professional Development Committee, let me welcome you to NYSAFLT's fourth professional webinar for educators for the 2014-2015 school year. Tonight's webinar is entitled Integrating Content Areas into Language Classrooms: What We Can Learn from Immersion Programs. My name is Ken Hughes, and I will be moderating this evening's webinar, which comes to us through the very generous sponsorship of the New York State Language Regional Bilingual Education Resource Network at NYU. The purpose of the Resource Bilingual Education Network at NYU is to provide ongoing support to educators of English language learners in districts and schools across New York State. NYSAFLT would like to take this opportunity to thank them for their very generous support of our endeavors, and we encourage you to please visit their website to learn more about what they do for students and teachers all across New York State. Please note that the audio and video of this webinar will be recorded. I will provide you with details about how you can access the on-demand recording at the end of this webinar. This webinar is scheduled to last 1 hour, with approximately 45 to 50 minutes devoted to the presenter. The remaining time will serve as a Q&A with the presenter to answer your individual specific questions. If you would like to ask a question of the presenter during the presentation, please use the chat or question feature in the GoToWebinar control panel on the side of your screen and type in your question. As moderator, I will keep track and organize these questions, and we'll share them with the presenter at the end of the presentation. As a registered live participant, you will receive a PDF certificate of attendance stating that you signed up and logged in to this webinar. NYSAFLT does not and cannot guarantee any professional development credit for this webinar. If you are watching this video on demand, NYSAFLT is unable to grant you a certificate of attendance. All participants are encouraged to work with their immediate supervisor to determine how best to receive credit for this professional development. In the event of technical difficulties, please remain connected to the webinar as you are able. NYSAFLT will contact you directly if the problem cannot be resolved. Thank you very much for your time and attention to these messages. And now, please let me take this opportunity to introduce you to Pat Lowe. Pat is a language resource specialist for the New York State Regional Bilingual Education Resource Network at NYU. Prior to this position, Pat worked for the New York City Department of Education as a teacher and supervisor with 26 years of experience in curriculum planning, instruction, and grant implementation. She is an adjunct professor at the City University of New York and New York University. Also a consultant to the National Foreign Language Center Star Talk programs and College Board Chinese Language and Culture Initiative. Pat, good evening. How are you?
Good evening. Thank you, Ken, for the introduction. And I would like to take this opportunity to thank NYSAFLT and my office, New York Auburn, to have this opportunity to really share with language teachers across New York State and other places some of my personal experiences and learning so that we can together make language learning more effective and interesting. So today our topic is integrating content area into language classrooms, and in the next 45 minutes or so, I will share some of the theoretical foundations and also provide you with some samples from the classrooms. Let's take a look at what immersion programs are about and what immersion program teachers are doing, what students are learning in these programs, and what we together as language teachers can learn from these programs, from the practices they implement in the schools and programs. Okay, so that's our topic. I think this topic really interests a lot of people because immersion programs are really in nationwide, have received a lot of attention. For one reason, it is the program is viewed as a foreign language program. On the other hand, the immersion program is also viewed as a program that can help English language learners to acquire English. So that's a two-way immersion program and the difference between one-way immersion programs, which we will cover in a little bit. So let's think about, let me see. Okay, I'm going to get to the next. All right. For tonight, there are several important questions, essential questions that we want to bear in mind as we follow along. The first one is that we want to know what is an immersion program. What do students in immersion programs learn, and what do teachers in immersion programs teach? What are the benefits and challenges in these programs? And finally, we're going to talk about what we all can learn from these immersion programs with student samples. We will look at them, and then we will have a discussion and reflection. Language immersion, let's think about that. People often think about, oh, I am doing immersion. Okay, as language teachers, we know that this is an approach that we need to take. There's a little difference between language immersion approach, the teaching approach, from the immersion programs. Now, here's a slide that says immersion program teaching approach. In following ACTFL's guidelines, target language input has to be at least 90% when we teach a foreign language. Now, this is the immersion approach. Whether or not you're in this kind of program, we use that approach. We want to immerse students in the environment where the target language is spoken. They have this input, and then we encourage them for the output. But immersion programs are a little different. These programs involve scheduling and course arrangement that are different from just teaching or learning in a foreign language setting. So this is how it works. We use the language, the target language, to teach subject areas, in addition to teach the language in the target language. That is the language immersion approach. This is very mouthful, but just think about that. If we teach French, Spanish, Chinese as a foreign language, and the good way to teach it is that we want to immerse the students in the culture and language in those languages. That's the language immersion approach. Now, if we use French or we use Spanish or Chinese to teach math, social studies, or science, then we will say that, wow, well, we're designing a program where students have the opportunity to learn the subject areas in the target language, given more attention and more exposure time. That will be the immersion programs. Of course, when we talk about the immersion approach, this is something that all language teachers should strive to do better. One is with teacher input. We need to create a learning environment for students to see, to hear, to feel the target language and culture. And on the other hand, this is not just one-way street that the teachers presents, performs in front of the class. We also want to have students to put out their best effort to have student output. Teachers need to create a learning environment for students to use the target language and to practice the target culture. And this is done in many ways. I'm sure that many teachers have experiences in that, we're not going to discuss here. So the effective foreign language teachers do use immersion teaching approach. That means 90% of the time is in target language, definitely with comprehensible input. We want our students to understand what is going on in the classroom, and then gradually remove the scaffolds. If they understand a little bit about, if first we want to say sit down with gestures, with all kinds of body movements so that they understand. But gradually we're going to remove these scaffolds, and then we will add in other scaffolds because we expect students to learn more of the target language and understand more without those basic input, that comprehensible input that we put in. And this is called scaffolds, because scaffolds means that they're not staying there forever. We're going to move them along. We take out the old scaffolds and we put in new scaffolds so our students can learn more and better. So this is the process for teachers to facilitate. And there are a lot of learning activities. I have seen many talented teachers. They have very creative ways to lead classroom learning activities. Those activities are to create opportunities for students to practice the language, not just the simple mimicking, repetition, but in a very meaningful way. And it is also about how students can use the target language, not just to know how the language works. So in the past, we have methods called grammar translation. We have the method only teacher lectures. And with the new thinking of a student center, with the thinking of that the students are really constructing their own knowledge, we are trying to stay away from them and to really let our students be part. They are our learning partners. They take control of their learning. Creating the immersion environment takes both ways, both physical and psychological environment. We want to create the classroom in a way that when student walks into the classroom, they feel that, oh, I am walking in this simulated target culture, and I feel that I'm in that environment, I can learn. And students also need to be supported in a way they feel that they can try the new target language. Being supported, safe means psychologically safe. I can try the ways to use this language without being criticized or ridiculed. I feel safe that I can voice my opinion, trying using the new language that I just learned. And these are the things that are basic for any language teachers. Now, so what about the immersion programs? How is it compared to the other programs? This is a chart that you see. We have K to 12, and sometimes people even talk about pre-K, K to 12 language program models. From elementary school grades K through 5, these are usually the programs that we have seen. We see the exploratory language programs, which means that sometimes children stay in one program for 3 months learning French. Then the next 3 months they will be learning Spanish, and there could be another language, Chinese, that they're learning. And I have witnessed some schools using this approach. The key idea is for children to explore different languages, and the benefit is really for students to experience these different cultures, and it really opened up their horizons, learning about other lands, other people, how language works in general. We also have a FLES program. FLES program varies. FLES program in the elementary school. They could be multi-year sequenced foreign language programs, but the time input time may vary. Sometimes we have seen that students take every week 30 minutes foreign language instruction to every day they learn a foreign language. But the key idea is that they do this all year long, and they will continue the next year, and eventually students are going to build up their uh, language proficiency. Of course, the more input contact time, the better the children can learn the language. Then there's this immersion program. So immersion programs means that uh, most of the time school starts from kindergarten, um, and they do it year by year. Children in these programs will learn sometimes 100% of the time, sometimes 50% of the time in the target language. And that means that they don't just learn language 30 minutes a day. They learn this foreign language, be it French or Spanish or Portuguese or Chinese. Some children can learn immersing this language, learning all subject areas for whole day, 100% of the time, 90% of the time, or 50% of the time. We will talk more about this. In the middle school, we also have the FLEX program, exploratory language programs. We also have the foreign language programs that is building multi-year sequenced so that children after a certain number of years, they have built on some language proficiency. Some immersion programs will continue into middle school, and very, very rarely that we see immersion programs start in middle school because it will be very challenging for teachers as well as for students to face the teaching in many subject areas in the target language. That is just the nature of how language learning is about. When the higher grade level goes, the more challenging the content becomes. Um, but right now we have seen that immersion programs are really picking up the pace nationwide. Um, 6 years ago, if the program started with kindergarten, now they are considering that these children will graduate from elementary school and they're coming on to middle school, that they will be considering a new programming strategy for children to continue to learn the target language. High school, grades 9 to 12, continue. We have these FLES program is very rare now, but in the United States, some states really do not require children to learn multi-years of language. So that's really what we want. We want to see students, when they learn a language, they can really do something with the language. They can use the language, and that really requires some number of years. In New York State, the minimal requirement is 1 full year of foreign language learning, but we really hope that all students can take at least 3 years of foreign language sequence, and then eventually they will take our statewide test, we call it Regents examination, to show their proficiency that they can really use the language in a real language setting. And for the immersion programs, that's very, very rare. And programming issue will usually put them in by subject areas or in a mixed situation using both languages. The major differences then between the foreign language and the immersion programs are as following. The foreign language programs, we start from any grade level. It depends on how the local districts decide to do that. The contact hours, we just said that it can vary from 30 minutes once a week to 5 times a week, you know, or their various situations. The subject areas is, we call it foreign language as a subject area. In the learning standards, we use the ACTFL standards, and there are also states that have put forth their own foreign language standards. They're a little different, but basically they follow the same idea of putting communication using the language as the most important aspect of learning the foreign language. What about immersion programs? Starting year, it's very crucial that we start from kindergarten or first grade. Sometimes, and I have seen it, that a few schools have started from their pre-K, and this is very rare, but maybe it's a trend in the future. But some programs starts from kindergarten, some from first grade. Now, we all know that in kindergarten and in first grade classes, that learning is very contextualized. When teachers teach something, they have a lot of things to refer back to. There are a lot of TPRs, total physical response, a lot of storytelling, referring to pictures, real objects. There are a lot of things that can help learning content become contextualized, and it's easier. The higher grade uh, levels, the more challenging, because the content learning, be it math or science learning or social studies, imagine learning the how an Indian tribe works in certain ways in another language. That's pretty challenging. So that's why we start from very early on. We want to build that language proficiency, working with the language, and then later on use the language to learn content. In the contact hours, usually it's half of the instructional day. But as I said before, in some, let's say Minnesota, and in some schools, they have 100% teaching in the target language in kindergarten, and moving on. First grade, 90%, and then in the third grade or fourth grade, it could be 50-50%. So this is a very, very difference from teaching the foreign language program, teaching foreign language as a subject. Um, Definitely large amount of input. The subject areas can be, we call it a foreign language, learning French, learning Spanish, and it also teaching, there's a subject of math. We teach math in Portuguese, we teach math in Japanese, we teach social studies in Russian, whatever language that your target language is. Now these subject areas will be taught in those languages, and as to which subject areas in English or in that target language is usually determined by the district. Now, the learning standards, not only that we follow the ACTFL standards, the state foreign language standards, we also need to pay very close attention to the state learning standards in all subject areas. What does that mean? If we teach math in Chinese, not only that we need to know how to teach language, but we also need to know how to teach math, because these are inseparable, that we need to teach math in Chinese. So very closely in New York State, for example, we pay attention to Common Core learning standards, that we need to know. If I'm teaching the first graders math, I need to know what math to teach, and then I need to consider what language do I need to use? What kind of language discourse? What are the language structures? What are the vocabulary that I need to focus on when I teach the math content? Very challenging. In terms of the population, we have in the immersion programs, there are two kinds. One is one-way immersion, and the other kind is two-way immersions. The difference is the student population. In one-way immersion programs, we have students who mostly do not speak the target language. For example, if we think about the case in Utah State, children there they're not from the home language from the Spanish, from the Portuguese, or from Chinese backgrounds, but these children are learning Chinese or Portuguese or Spanish. This is one-way immersion, where the students in that class mostly do not speak the target language, are not from the target language culture. On the other hand, the case in New York City, we very often see the two-way immersion programs, and we also call it dual language programs. Now, these programs are programs that you have, you know, half or more or less the students speak the target language, let's say Chinese, and the other half are English proficient students. They are being programmed in the same class, and they learn both languages for all subject areas together. For the percentage, as we said earlier, the instructional time, how do we decide what is the percentage that we will use Chinese or Japanese to teach math or social studies? It really depends on the school board, depends on the local school community to decide together. And when it comes to scheduling, sometimes we're seeing half a day program, half a day in Spanish, the other half a day in English every day. Or that we can have day A, we use Spanish for instruction. Day B, we use Chinese for instruction. Why? Research definitely has informed us that in second language acquisition, that learners need to be surrounded with input that is meaningful and interesting. And also the immersion approach maximizes the exposure time. So now in the immersion programs, since we have so much contact time in the target language, children definitely, or the students definitely, have more practice, have more input, and more opportunities for output. And learners acquire the target language and culture in a very natural way. Imagine that they learn this target language and culture from kindergarten. So they learn from each other. They sometimes teach themselves things because they observe. It's creating that language acquisition plus learning environment. And this is an example of the schedule. On the left-hand side, when we have this circle thing, this is how they schedule the time, let's say in Utah. The red is signifying math and content areas in Chinese literacy. On the left-hand side, we see that math and content areas in English and English language arts, 50-50. 50% in English, 50% in Chinese. And on the right-hand side, that's a Chinese. This is taken in New York City public school. Their chart in the Chinese classroom. This is what they write. They have from morning to afternoon. They have social studies. They have reading and writing. They have music. They have math. Subject areas. And this is another example this one is from South Carolina, and they also indicated what language is being used on what day to teach what subject areas. But when it comes to what students learn, it's really intertwined. We cannot really separate this is language learning, this is the content area learning, because content area instruction and learning is being taught in the target language. So when we teach the content area knowledge, we are also teaching language proficiency. We're helping students to learn both at the same time, as the picture indicates that. In the end, you were thinking that there are two sets of standards, math standards and language standards, but they infuse together and become the knowledge base of our students. So how do we know if a language program is successful? And it takes several measures, right? The biggest challenge for the immersion program is that not only that we want to measure their consider their language learning, are they really they're learning Chinese, can they really use Chinese to do something, can they greet people, can they go out to a store and use Chinese to purchase, can they make a phone call to inquire something, can they understand a film, a clip in Chinese. But also they need to meet the challenge that most of these testings that the state has for math or other areas are in English. We test our students from grade 3. In some of the states, they even test earlier. But in your New York State, let's say that in grade 3, we take the state test in math, in English. All right, so let's say that we learn the math in Chinese. How do we really help students understand that they're taking the test in English and they can still do well? That's a big challenge for all of us. And in the two-way immersion program, when they're doing 50-50, hopefully the English part will also pick up the responsibility of helping children make that language connection, knowing that in Chinese this is the way and in English that's the way. These are the basic math concepts and skills we need to master. But this is always a challenge for all students, all programs. We need to make sure that children not only can use that target language, but can also use that math skills, math concepts to handle the standardized tests. So how do we meet the challenge? Constantly curriculum guidance, professional development, co-planning, very, very important. And that requires that we teachers, as teachers, we need to have both languages, subject area knowledge. We need to constantly communicate with parents and let them know what we're doing. And we need to maximize our times to immerse our students in both content area learning and language. How do we build on, how do we scaffold, and how do we bring students along from the very beginning to gradually give us some scaffolds so that we can move them along. So these are the immersion program essentials. And later on, when we share the PowerPoint and recording, you will be able to see it. But I want to talk about some of this is a summary, some of the things that we see in the immersion program, some examples. Now, here's a sample. Now, on the left-hand side, we see that it's a grade 4 this math material is in Spanish. Okay, so in the immersion program, children will use this page to learn math. And now this is grade 4. Not only that, they will need to learn the math concepts. And this is we're doing the additional fraction here, but also notice that we need to use Spanish to handle all these problems. On the right hand side, you see that this is a sample of Chinese learning about season. Why do we have 4 seasons? Now, not only that, they need to learn the language, they need to master the concepts of why the 4 seasons happens. And yes, we do have pictures, visuals to support, but it also takes a lot of time to use language to support learning. And here's an example of making math connection. This sample was collected from PS 163 in Flushing, Queens. We thank the teacher there. When they learn shapes, they also learn perimeters and they learn areas. So notice that the teacher gives examples of how we can use little blocks, boxes to create different shapes. And students will be asked to create their own shapes and measure and talk about what the area, the units of their areas, the perimeters they have discovered. Let's take a look at an example. Now, these are the student samples. So one student says, oh, this is me, okay? And drawing this, notice that I use, this is the area, how many units, and this is the perimeters. Okay, and this is my flower. I made a giraffe, I made a T shape, and I made a rabbit. This is created by first grade students. They are counting, okay, and they're doing arts work. It's a combination of language and math together. We're doing addition here. Halloween time, this is also provided by PS 163 in Flushing. They're making these skeletons, and the math problem is that we need to count how many bones do we have, and the students will create their own bones. They will do some writing, and they will do their math sentence as well as Chinese sentence. This is again, but combining math and language learning together. All right, here's another example. This is collected from Fresh Meadow, Queens, PS 173. The students wrote more. They created their own story. Still is the math problems, but they're writing in full sentences. I have 3 fish, my father has 4 fish. Altogether, how many fish do we have? It is the same way that the elementary school teacher in the English classroom is teaching, using word problem, not just math sentence, but also to create their own math problems in word problems, and then illustrated with a picture. This example is provided by a teacher from South Carolina, making connection, and people like to say STEM curriculum. This is one of them. It's actually in the Immersion classroom, first grade, about the cycle of how a plant grows from seeds, and with arts work, a lot of comprehensible input, because it's first grade. They also do actually growing the plant, and they learn the characters, they learn the sentences, and they do their own writing like this. This is the little book that the students in that school, following the teacher's instruction, this is what they came up with. They wrote sentences. Stage first, I have a garden. They did, we see these books. In the second stage, they grow. I put the seeds in, and we have a sprout, and we have little tiny 2 leaves, and it will grow. It will have flowers, and then it will have a fruit. So actually, because we have more time in the immersion program, you see there's a lot of things that we can do with students' output. They practice the oral language. They also devote a lot of time developing literacy. Here's another very creative lesson by the teacher Li Jing from South Carolina, same school as the other one. This is the third grade classroom, where the combining culture, language, and content all together. They're teaching about some observable physical phenomena, force, And for one thing, culture, dumplings, making dumplings. So the teacher posed the questions, okay, what are the things when we're making dumplings, the culture connected? Let's observe what are the ingredients, what's solid and what's liquid. So when they're doing this, developing the process, oh, how do we make dumplings? And students will say that this is liquid, that is solid, and these are the ingredients. And not only that, what is happening is that when we make the dumpling wrap, there are some phenomena that we can observe. Force. And we have learned in the science class that force can change the shape of the objects. And here's an example with a picture that, okay, so when we make dumpling wrap, we use force. We roll it and then the wrap becomes flat. And then when we put the dough inside, we wrap it up. That's another example of using force can change the shape of the objects. Another example, science connection. This is from California. Another teacher provided this example. They're learning the organs inside the body by showing exactly where they are, what the shapes are. Now, for again, for the children in the second grade, this is the second grade classroom. They're learning about human body and different organs. um, we really get to, it's very visual, it's contextualized, and when students learn how to say these things, they also acquire the concepts of where the internal body organs are. It's very challenging for our teachers because there are not enough materials that are readily for use in the immersion classrooms. So what happens is the teachers in the immersion programs often have to create their own materials, as we saw very creative work earlier on, and they translate a lot of the materials into the target language. And here's an example for translating this whole book. This teacher translated, um, you know, for about book about where to wake up, where what's happening with the weather. So translating, and they do reading, and this is the part that literacy is very heavy. They're learning the content, but they're also analyzing, using the questions, finding out this the whole discourse, describing the weather, and finding out how the weather forms, what is happening with that. There are different kinds of weather. Is every day the weather is the same? What happens to the rainwater that just fell? Where did it go? So all this involves a lot of concept learning, but through the language, and children will learn to recite, they will ask questions, they will summarize, they will provide, they will come up with main ideas and details the same way as the English language arts classrooms are doing, aligning with Common Core state learning standards. Even in the lower grade. Now we also use in the English side, they could be reading, let's say, the biggest pumpkin ever. And in the Chinese room, teachers sometimes they translate that, but more so is that, let's think about it. This is by the teacher in PS 163, Miss Alice Lai, very creatively. So in the story, they talk about two mice worked together and they grew a very, very pumpkin. But they want to get the pumpkin into a fair for competition. And how do they move the pumpkin? It did not really say so much in that book. The book is basically for a read aloud, and sometimes share reading to understand the content. But the teacher took one step further. Let's talk about how, again, the force. How do we move the pumpkin? And students came up with different ideas illustrated by the teachers, this is oral language development. We didn't see this is kindergarten, not too much writing by the teacher, but use illustration. We're talking developing using the oral language to develop the content knowledge for discussions, oral language discussion, and related to the reading they had done earlier. So, what can all foreign language teachers learn from what we just shown you the immersion program practice? We know that on the right hand side, we know the 5 C's from the ACTFL standards: communication, cultures, connections, comparison, communities. Now we see that with the examples that we just show you, that we have pretty much everything. And we want to demonstrate that these standards can be done through content area learning. Especially in the immersion programs, connections and communications come really are the forefront. We are talking about connections with all subject areas learning, and done through whether interpersonal, children have discussions, or through interpretation, interpretive mode, they understand something, or through presentational, they present what they have learned either through writing or through oral presentation. And here are the things we know that in the immersion programs, what we can learn is content and cultures are integrated into language lessons. We don't separate them. They are a natural infusion that we want to present to our students. We also learn that we need to have a very good balance between literacy and oracy. That's the oral language. We do not just teach vocabulary or phrases in isolation. It has to be in full discourse and connecting with literacy. We also learned that we need to use target language consistently as these immersion program teachers do. And finally, we have high expectations and with high comprehensible input. Together, we know that children can learn. We know that we want to provide them with the equitable scaffolds, comprehensible input, and then gradually remove some scaffolds, adding more scaffolds so that our children can follow and can learn more and more. So finally, I want to thank everybody for listening to this presentation. And Ken, I'm ready to take questions at this point.
Pat, thank you very, very much for sharing really some incredibly wonderful information with us this evening. Ladies and gentlemen in the audience, now is your time to send me questions via the chat or question feature of the GoToWebinar control panel on the right-hand side of your screen. You can ask any question you want pertaining to what our presenter has shared with us this evening, and I will be sure to ask those questions. Pat, we do have a couple of questions that have come through during the presentation that I'd like to share with you now. Could you talk a little bit about parents? Potentially we have some people in the room who are parents. I'm assuming most of the people in the room this evening are educators as well. Parents play a really important role in the education process, and certainly with the immersion process. And I would dare say that parents most likely need to be educated fully about what immersion programs are and what the goals and outcomes and expectations are. Could you speak a little bit to the advice that a teacher, an immersion teacher, might give to an anxious, nervous, apprehensive, unsure, monolingual parent who's considering an immersion program but not too sure if it's really right for their child?
This is a wonderful question, and Ken, you're absolutely right. So we really consider parents as our learning partners, and particularly in the immersion programs where parents may not speak the target language. What do we do in that situation? It is a utmost responsibility for the program administrators, the whole immersion program team, and the teachers to have a constant communication with parents. Let them know that it does. They don't, parents, okay, they don't speak the target language, it's fine, but they need to support and ask the right questions to let the children share with them what they're learning. And sometimes they are supportive. For example, I have seen that teachers constantly making out weekly letters, parent letters, and there's sometimes they're being blogs being posted that these are the things that we're learning in class. Ask your children, have they done this? Even though the parents do not speak the language, just like you take we take our children to learn piano. Eventually these children are going to be very proficient in playing piano, and we parents sit there and say, oh, I don't know this. But we want to make sure they do practice. We want to make sure they do have the materials. We want to make sure they're putting time to it. And these are the things that I think that we want to advise parents, that they can and they are very important partners in this process.
Great, thank you. We have a question here. It's actually a New York City specific question. The statement in the question is, I understand that the quote unquote dual language programs in New York City are a two-way immersion program. Is that correct?
That is correct. So far, New York City views that not only as a learning, language learning, foreign language learning opportunities for the English proficient students, they also see that as an opportunity to help the English language learners learn English language better and faster. And according to national research, we have seen reports that this is actually the best program model for English language learners to acquire the English language faster and better. And so it's a two-way situation that both parties benefit from the English proficient students and from the English language learners.
Great, thank you. We have a lot more questions coming in, so we'll get right to the next one. How does immersion teaching differ from bilingual teaching?
Okay, so that's the good question. The immersion program, immersion teaching is actually a form of bilingual program. If you think about that, is that we have many different formats of bilingual programs, and immersion programs definitely is one of them. But it is more rigorous and it requires more time, and it is also in elementary school, at least we have observed, is a language separation situation that in the immersion program setting, if we teach let's say Chinese, we only speak Chinese in this class. Whereas in the bilingual program, if it's a transitional program, there are times that we use both languages because we want to make sure that the children learn English fast. We want to make sure that children get the content very clearly. If they coming at third grade or sixth grade in the transitional bilingual program, we want to make sure they know the content.
Thank you. That's a great answer and a really nice segue into our next question. And the question is focuses around teaching content effectively in a foreign language classroom. This person says that they've tried to teach some concepts in Chinese, but it took a lot of time, and students just didn't understand the language. So how do you approach a situation where you want to teach content? It could be any type of content. They don't really have the language skills necessary to learn that content. How do you approach that situation?
It is a big challenge, I think, even for the most experienced teachers. But I think of it this way, that one, when I select the content, if I'm a language teacher teaching a foreign language in that setting, I want to consider what content I want to infuse into. And the way I think is that I want to pick something that the children have ample experiences and background knowledge in. For example, if they are learning in the content area, they're learning the force. This is the time that I bring in that topic because they can make that cognitive connection and it will be easier for them. The second thing is that we really coming back to that comprehensible input. What are the things that we can use to make this content more comprehensible to them so that we can make that easy transition, because it is difficult that for us as well that we need to deal with language learning and content learning, two challenging tasks at the same time. So if we can minimize the challenge of the content, then we can increase the learning that we can use for input in the language.
Thank you very much. I also think it speaks to a very strong curriculum design. Can you speak to curriculum design in terms of immersion programs? Is there anything that should be taken into consideration when designing curriculum that another non-immersion program doesn't necessarily do, or do you find the process to be similar?
In the immersion program, we know that co-planning is very important. The curriculum design is that it has to align with the grade level curriculum.
Okay.
And that said, what do we do as foreign language teachers in the other setting? If we want to really infuse something, we need to also just even superficially that we want to find out what children are learning at that grade level, okay, in the other classrooms, what children are experiencing. And you know, for all teaching, we know that get to understand the children's life, get to understand what they're learning, get to understand what they need to do all together, not just in the my only closed door foreign language classroom. So I think it's a more effective approach if we take it that way, considering as a whole set of learning for the children.
Thank you very much for following up on that. We have a question about textbooks and instructional materials. This might be a kind of an open-ended question, but I'll ask it anyway. What are some common textbook or instructional materials that immersion instructors use? And part B to that question, how do you evaluate a good textbook for an immersion program? What are the guidelines that you use to either yay or nay a potential textbook candidate? Or instructional material candidate.
Yeah, I think, Ken, you know, we all want to say that I wish there was one textbook that we can use. And even in foreign language, we say, oh, that is not
Yeah.
happening. Because we all need to adapt to our own use. Now, in the immersion program, because we have a curriculum, and that is the, let's say in your state, that's the common core curriculum that we want to use. And how do we decide that, you know, we cannot teach it all? So this is a determination between the team. You know, I have the English part because it's 50-50. Now, the English teachers will focus on this. I will focus on this. And based on my focus, I will try to find aligning to what I need to teach there. I will try to find the materials in my target language to develop the skills and language proficiency. But the challenge is that we don't have the readily made curriculum materials for that. And for Spanish, we do. And for Chinese, it is really a very big challenge.
Yeah.
And the immersion program teachers, they are fabulous teachers. They work, I think, harder than anybody else, but also they get a lot of feedback. The feeling that you get from getting where you are, that's also tremendous. It's a very rewarding job.
Thank you for explaining. We want to move to the other end of the spectrum, and let's talk about examinations. This participant states that states measure progress with English-based exams. So, do you feel that immersion schools are in trouble to show results because the examination is not necessarily reflective of the instruction that's taken place in that target language?
As we said, this is a very big challenge, and it sometimes we would think that it's not fair. But let me share this with you that we have seen a lot of national reports and schools reporting what they have done. Even let's say a school in Minnesota immersion program, they start 100% from kindergarten, 100% in
Mm-hmm.
Chinese, and to the third grade when they're doing the testing, the children perform marvelously.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, it's there are a lot of things that you ask why. Why? Because we need to make that connection. And why? Because there are skills, there are cognitive development that these are transferable
Mm-hmm.
skills. So one, I think making connection between the English and the other language is very important. Two, trust that we need to teach skills. We need to teach thinking. We need to teach all the strategies
Mm-hmm.
that the children can learn in one language and transfer into another language.
Let's talk a little bit about college level foreign language instruction. Are there any content areas that you might suggest be included in immersion programs if they do exist at the college level that you might want to recommend or you would consider recommending?
From the college level, of course, I only covered K to 12
Understood.
because even in even in high school, this is already very rare. But we have nationwide, we have seen some program in New York City. Actually, we have Hunter College. They are in this program that they take students who have learned some Chinese and they have very intensive instruction because the goal is not to help their students become Chinese majors. We want to develop the language skills in these students who are taking, let's say, science as their major,
Hmm.
or accounting as their major, or business as their major, or medical science, whatever they want to do. That's their major. That's their areas, and we are concentrating adding those areas for language so that they can develop the language skills and they can, let's say, close a deal with the parties in Shanghai. So that will be our ultimate goals, and there are ways to do that. And I give you one example: these flagship programs. One of them in New York City is Hunter College. They do have these programs, and what do? They focus on language learning, and they send, at some point, third year, fourth year, they send these students to China to be enrolled in a university, learning together with the students there in those majors that they wanted to major in. Fantastic.
Pat, we have three more quick questions before we close up the webinar. The first question is, what can we do as teachers to promote immersion programs? What maybe one or two top of your head ideas about what we can do to promote our programs?
First of all, I think it's very important to communicate with the school administrators and the parents community because we need and get our facts together. We want to understand that when we talk to them, we have research as our back. But we also need to think about, I want to be very realistic. We need to think about what it involves. Oh, this is so fancy. This is so dandy. We want to do it. How do we do it? Come up with a plan and communicate. Have a group of people to think about this idea and what it takes for this particular school community to implement this program. I think that's the first stage. And then we're going to collect information from other programs. It's been proven in many places these programs are successful. Where are they? Okay, where are they? Can we take a look at them? Can we go take a visit? So this will be the second stage to understand these programs, and then we're going to, of course, ask our consultants or people who are more knowledgeable in the target language, because the administrators may not understand or know these languages, but they can certainly play a very important role in terms of designing and supporting a dual language program.
The second question refers to one of your earlier slides, which said that 90% of the time the target language should be used in foreign language instruction. Let's talk about the 10%. What do you find are the situations where teachers are using not the target language in that 10% of the time?
This 90% standard is set forth by the by ACTFL,
Correct.
and there are times that when we have, let's say, as we said, that when the content is challenging, when the language is challenging, that it's double challenge for our students to learn. And there are times that we, in order to cut the chase, and so do this, and I will give you a signal, and I teach you in the future. When I say this, this means that. Introducing a new activity, right, the first time, we want the student to understand, not to be challenged by the process, understanding the directions, but really get to the work. Yes, we can, in that situation, use the language they're familiar with. When we check to see whether or not they have got to certain points for even for assessments, if we as only target language for the certain questions, then we do not understand. If they don't understand the parts that we want to test them, or they do not understand the directions. So those are the situations that I can think of. But I want to come back to immersion programs, and I have seen many places they say that in the immersion programs, the target language input is 100%. 100% in the immersion program.
Thank you for clarifying. Our final question, and if there are other questions out there, I apologize, we will not be able to get to them tonight, but certainly please feel free to contact Pat Lowe directly with the email address that she provided at the beginning of this webinar to have your questions directly answered by her. We just had so many questions this evening, and we are over time. I will allow this one last question, and that is, do the English teachers in immersion programs tend to speak the target language as well?
The English teachers do not need to speak the target language, but they need to have the constant communication with the target language teacher, because we need to discuss the co-planning is very important. We need to talk about what children are learning in one class. How can the other teachers support the same concept and skills learning using another language? So sometimes teachers are, oh, you have learned this in the other, and this is, you can use the language that way. That is absolutely not just permissible, but also encouraged, because at the end of the day, it's about making connections. That's how we, at any age, we learn. Our brains actually function in the way that the more connections we make, the better we learn.
Pat Lowe, on behalf of everybody in the audience, let me take this opportunity to thank you for taking time out of your personal and professional life to share your expertise and knowledge regarding integrating content areas into language classrooms. It was a delight to work with you this evening, and I know that our audience is so grateful for all of your knowledge that you shared with us this evening. Thank you very much, Pat.
Thank you. I want to thank everyone for participating in this session. And we definitely want to support New York State Associations of Foreign Language. And I hope everybody will get a chance to participate in our future activities and our annual events, whether it's regional or the statewide conference. Thank you very much for spending the time with us this evening.
And again, Pat, thank you so very much for such a very informative presentation. As I mentioned at the beginning of this webinar, it has been recorded, and the recording of this webinar will be made available on the NYSAFLT website in the coming days. Actually, if you visit nysaflt.org/webinars, where you came to register, you will find the link or the embedded video to this webinar on this page. So please visit and please share with your colleagues. It is open and viewable to everybody who visits. Additional details will be sent out to you and to the general membership on how it can be accessed, as well as information about your PDF certificate, which will take a couple of days to process by NYSAFLT headquarters. But trust us, it is on its way within the coming days. If you have a particular topic that you'd like to see presented, or you know of a colleague who NYSAFLT should approach about presenting a webinar, please let us know via email at webinars@nysaflt.org. And as you can see on our screen, our next webinar is going to take place on March 19th, dealing with Common Core reading strategies. And one of NYSAFLT's very own leaders, Candy Black, will be discussing that. And if you're a fan of Paul Sandrock, and who isn't, we invite you to join us for another free webinar on April 16th at 7 o'clock Eastern Standard Time, where Paul, the Director of Education for ACTFL, will discuss establishing clear learning targets for ourselves and our students. If you have any questions after today, please contact us at webinars@nysaflt.org. Someone from NYSAFLT will be sure to answer your question. On behalf of the NYSAFLT Professional Development Committee, thank you very much for attending this evening's webinar.